The Return of the Twelves by Pauline Clarke. Chapter 12, 5,000 pounds. The book which contains the story of the young men had gone when Max woke up. He supposed his mother must have come in and taken it after he was asleep and forgotten to put it back. In fact, Philip had taken it after he had left Max crying in the attic. He was now sitting up in bed, continuing to read it, and everything else in the volume which concerned the wooden soldiers the professor was looking for. He had studied Max's soldiers with a detailed and scientific interest, such as he applied to his work at school. He had already noticed in the shoebox where Max kept them a few of the round stands that balanced them, and he had now found in the book Bramwell's own description of what the soldiers looked like, including those round stands, which he referred to as their one shoe. This shoe for each man, or only one, was like a round flat cake with two holes in the middle, into which his feet were inserted as in a stocks, Bramwell had written, and at the bottom of the page was a footnote. In a footnote he had added, "The curious shoe was a little stand which each soldier had to keep him from falling." Philip also thought Bramwell's description of what they wore tallied with Max's soldiers. A high black cap with several hieroglyphical figures on it. But these, naturally, he thought, would be rubbed off by now. Their coat, or rather jacket, was shaped after the manner of a sailor's, and was in color a light scarlet. They also wore light pantaloons of the same color. There was not much color left now, but they certainly had been scarlet. Now Philip, in his time, had been just as keen on soldiers, and he could not help a feeling of excitement that here might be the very ones the famous Bramwell had written about. He read backwards and forwards in the book he found, Charlotte's description of how each girl seized a soldier from Bramwell's new box, named him and called him hers. He found the bit where Bramwell said that 2 or 3 only were still in being, but like Max, he was not unduly worried by this. Someone else could have collected and preserved what Bramwell had lost or broken. Now, if it could be proved they were the ones, was not Max good for 5,000 pounds? Philip was a practical boy, and he liked money. He had been going to suggest to Maxie that he would help him write the letter to the professor, describing his find for a small percentage to be paid when he had received his 5,000. But Max had been in such a devilish temper that he could say nothing then of this plan, and also he had an idea that Max was so besotted with these soldiers he might not want to sell them. Why otherwise had he flown into such a rage at his touching them? Of course, Philip knew there was a kind of unwritten law in the family about not playing with each other's things without asking. He supposed he should have asked, and he did not quite know why he had not, except that Max was in bed and his curiosity overcame him. When Philip came to the list of soldiers, he reread it carefully, noticing Butter Crashy was 140. He did think it odd. Somehow Max could have heard the name, or of course made it up the way he said when the soldier fell in the butter. But that he should also be 140. Max must have got hold of this book, perhaps, and read the list, or someone at school had told him about the Bronte soldiers. That was more likely. The same reasons could account for Stumps, whose name he saw further down. Max remembered some of the names he had been told and used them. But in this case, if he knew about the Bronte soldiers, why did he not say so at Mr. Howson's? And again, when his father read the professor's letter, Philip remembered Max had blushed and gone absolutely silent when Mr. Rochester told him about the soldiers. Did Max know these were the Bronte's soldiers? How could he know? Anyway, Max knew more than he was saying, Philip decided. Either he had to work on his own and write this Seneca D. Brewster himself in secret, or he had to ingratiate himself with Max and be let into whatever it was Max knew. He had an idea Jane was in it, and to get Max to let him into it was difficult when he had flung his brother off on the attic floor as hard as he jolly well could. Could it be done through Janey? This was possible, and meanwhile, what did Max know? Really, there was no proving these were the very soldiers. There never would be, as his father had said, and they had not even been found at Haworth. But did that matter? If the professor wanted to think they were, why not let him? If he was really silly enough to pay £5,000 for some old wooden soldiers, then it was likely he was sufficiently gullible to accept any that were offered. No, Philip decided, the chance was much too good to be lost, and he had better get in first before anyone else offered theirs. He slammed the book and swung out of bed with his mind made up. He returned the volume to Max's room while Max was out of it, and as soon as breakfast was over, he bicycled to the post office, purchased an airmail letter, and wrote a suitable epistle to Professor Seneca D. Brewster. From this, it can be seen that Philip was a clear-sighted boy of acumen and determination, and when he did this, he was thinking quite honestly how good it would be for Max, to say nothing of the rest of them, who might share a little of it in his fortune, to acquire the reward, and then, even if he thought now that he cared more for the soldiers than the money, he would not still think so in a few years' time. But as yet, Philip did not know the whole story. Up in Max's bedroom, Max was telling Jane of last night's adventure. The book lay between them on the bed, and later they meant to read it. "And I'd jolly well like to cut all the strings in his tennis racket or puncture his bike," Max finished venomously, still feeling sore over Philip's behavior. "Well, look, Max, the chief thing is that Butter and the others weren't hurt," Jane said. "But I do think we ought to protect them more." "So do I," Butter said. As they did not recognize the monster, they all remained frozen. "But will they always be quick enough to do that? Do you think I ought to warn Butter to tell them to? Supposing Mummy and Daddy ask to see them again because of this old professor's letter? And what if someone goes to the attic and they're doing things?" "Yes, or looks through the keyhole while we're in there, Max. Do you think Philip's going to do anything?" "What could he do? He could write to that professor, couldn't he, and tell him about your soldiers." "But he'd ask Daddy and Mummy first, wouldn't he?" Max said, horrified. Jane looked doubtful. "We could hide them somewhere if we had to," she said. This idea comforted Max, and he felt very glad that he had Jane to help him. They went up to the attic, found that the door had a rusty bolt inside. Perhaps it was once a bedroom, and made this work by using the bicycle oil. Jane also found a small piece of wood to fill up the keyhole from inside. There was no key. With these precautions taken, they felt happier. "Max," Jane said, turning to an idea she had thought last night in bed. "Can I make them a feast?" Max stared at her. It sounded suspiciously like a doll's tea party. "But Jane, you can't play with them like that," he protested. "I didn't mean play with them," she said. "I only meant put it all ready and see if they like it." "You mustn't sit them up or anything. They'd probably be offended," he explained. "I know, I wasn't going to. But you fed them. You said so when they were on the kitchen table. After all you've done, lots of things with them, seeing them get downstairs and all that, and I haven't done any." Jane, being a girl, was really perhaps more interested in feeding the 12s than seeing them on parade. "Oh, all right. It can't hurt to put it ready, I suppose," Max said. "I know I'll make a great table like a banquet while you get the things." "Yes," Jane said, and she slipped out and hurried downstairs. Max fetched his bricks and laid some in a row. Over these he put an old snakes and ladders board folded up. Round this imposing table he put more bricks, enough to seat the young men. At the head of the table he built a more splendid seat than the rest, higher, and with a back and arms. This he intended for the patriarch. "But," muttered Max, "I shouldn't be surprised if one of those 4 kings doesn't pinch it." So he put 4 second-best seats each side of the patriarch, 2 aside. These had bricks, but no arms. They were meant for the kings. The seats below them, each side, were simply single bricks with no backs or arms, and were meant for the other soldiers. "I hope they'll know what I mean," Max said to himself. All this took a good deal of fiddling to fight the right-sized bricks, and when Jane came back, Max had only just finished. "That's super," she whispered, and she began quickly to lay upon the table the set of tiny brass plates she had kept from her doll's house days. At either end she put a brass candlestick, and between these, small piled plates, gleaming at the edge, filled with bread crumbs, cake crumbs, biscuit crumbs. desiccated coconut currants, and silver pills. The plates were milk and bottle tops. By each man's own plate she put a tiny wine glass. Finally, quite aware that the 12s would expect strong drink and not tea, she put a decanter each end, filled with a rich red drink. Max was delighted. Fancy Jane having kept all the wine glasses and decanters unbroken. She had had them years ago. He had broken the stem from one, but his mother had carefully stuck it back. It was true what Jane said about girls being careful with their things. When the feast was spread, the genius Janey retired modestly to the other end of the attic and waited. Max picked up the patriarch, who all this time had sat motionless with the others in the canoe. "The genii have spread you a table in the wilderness," he said. "Partake, if you choose." And as he said it, he reminded himself of the 23rd Psalm. Though he could not quite think why, it seemed a suitable way of telling Butter Crashy, who at once bowed and showed every sign of pleasure. Max put him back and sat on the Ashanti stool. The 12s were not long in accepting the invitation. They fixed a balsa wood gangplank and scrambled or slid down it according to taste, running for seats at the table as if they had not seen a banquet for years, which indeed was the case. The younger members, notably the middies, Cracky, Tracky, and Monkey, elbowed and pushed and squealed with excitement. The more stalwart warriors took their middle places with greater ceremony, while the 4 kings and the patriarch himself walked in a solemn procession from the boat. Sneaky strutted with such an air of conceited haughtiness, and yawned with such a bored flourish of his hand to his mouth that it made Max laugh, but he could not help noticing that their walk became brisk as they neared their places. They ate, drank, talked, choked, laughed, toasted, slapped each other on the back, and grew very merry, as befitted such gallant young men. Bravery indeed, so far forgot himself as the leap out of his bravey indeed, so far forgot himself as the leap up on his seat, and, beginning to jump wildly in the air and wave his arms, sang in a loud voice, "Cannikin clink! Drink, boys, drink! Drink, drink, cannikin clink!" This song, evidently well known to the rest, caused immense excitement. The decanters were seized and passed round. Glasses clinked. More than one young man followed Bravy's example and stood upon his chair, Sneaky dancing so wildly and jumping so high in the air that it seemed doubtful to Max whether he would land upon the seat again, and more likely that the table would be upset, and Jane's wine glasses broken beyond repair. The patriarch, however, called them to order, and the wild junketing gave place to brave stories and loud laughter. When not a crumb was left, not a drop of ruby red liquid, and when several were showing distinct signs of inebriation, the patriarch arose. Max leaned forward eagerly to hear what he would say, and Jane crawled a little nearer. "Beware, young men, of all monsters, such as he who seized upon us recently. Show no signs of life to any but the 2 genii you know. This warning came to me from the present chief genie. An unknown danger threatens the 12s. And with this, the patriarch held up his hands and took his splendid seat again. The bell rang for lunch. Max and Jane tiptoed from the attic. "When did you warn Butter?" she said, "about Philip?" "I didn't. Only in my mind I was going to," Max said. "But he seems to know. He said it to me once. He said that the chief genie said, 'Revere this man Crashy, as he is entrusted with secrets which you can never know.' So we needn't worry too much," Jane said. "Only keep our eyes open." Their father had the local paper by his plate. "I said the professor's letter would raise a dust," he laughed. "Listen to this one. Sir, it is unlikely, in the unlikely event of a set of Bronte soldiers to which Professor Seneca D. Brewer refers to in his letter coming to light, it is to be hoped that the owner or finder will know his local, nay, his national duty, and will offer them to the Bronte Museum. This is their rightful home, and we, in this part of Yorkshire, are their rightful guardians. It would be monstrous if this unexpected remnant of the Bronte heritage should cross the Atlantic. I remain, sir, etc., etc." So cross they've not even found so cross and they're not even found yet, said Mr. Morley, laughing. Isn't it priceless how they keep saying nay, remarked Philip lightly. I wonder if the museum will weigh in, said Mrs. Morley. Will they offer to pay £5,000 for them? Asked Jane, instead. There's no knowledge, said her father. Maxie, shall we write to the old professor and say you've got them, he suggested, half teasing, and get the £5,000? Max's pixie face went white. He swallowed his mouthful. No, he said fiercely. They're mine. I found them. I don't want £5,000. You can't. And that's the end of chapter 12.